June 8th, 1943, 12:13 in the afternoon. Hiroshi Tanaka stood behind the barbed wire fence at prisoner of war camp number 5, watching the massive American battleship USS Defiance sitting peacefully in San Francisco Bay. The sun was high, the water was calm, the steel hull of the warship gleamed like polished silver against the blue horizon. Tanaka had been taught his entire life that Americans were demons without honor. Barbarians who knew nothing of Bushido, nothing of sacrifice, nothing of the warrior's code. His instructors at the Imperial Naval Academy had been clear. His father, a decorated officer in the Emperor's fleet, had been even clearer. Americans fight without honor. They torture prisoners. They show no mercy. If you are captured, it is better to but in exactly 47 seconds, those Americans would prove him catastrophically wrong. In 47 seconds, the USS Defiance would explode with a force that would shake the ground beneath Tanaka's feet and send a mushroom cloud of black smoke 300 meters into the California sky. In 47 seconds, 768 American sailors would die in one of the worst naval disasters in United States history. And in the 4 minutes that followed, Hiroshi Tanaka would have to choose between everything he had been taught and everything he was about to witness. Between the propaganda that had filled his mind for 32 years and the truth that was about to tear his world apart. What Tanaka witnessed in those 4 minutes would haunt him for the rest of his life. But not in the way you would expect. Because sometimes the enemy is not who they tell you it is. Sometimes hatred blinds us from the truth. And sometimes it takes a catastrophe to reveal what honor really means. This is the story of how one piece of bacon, one cowboy hat, and 4 minutes of chaos changed 2 nations forever. 2 weeks earlier, late May 1943, the troop transport USS Liberty cut through the Pacific swells like a knife through dark water. Below deck in the converted cargo hold that now served as a floating prison, 200 Japanese prisoners of war sat in silence. Some stared at the metal walls. Some closed their eyes and tried to sleep. Most simply endured. Lieutenant Hiroshi Tanaka sat with his back against the cold steel bulkhead, his hands resting on his knees, his eyes fixed on nothing. He had not spoken in 3 days. Not since the American sailors had pulled him from the wreckage of his destroyer at Midway. Not since he had made the choice that would define the rest of his life. He had surrendered. The shame burned hotter than the tropical sun had burned on that June day a year ago, when the American dive bombers came screaming out of the clouds. Hotter than the fires that consumed his ship. Hotter than the fuel oil that had covered the Pacific like a blanket of flame. His father's words echoed in his memory. The warrior who surrenders has no honor. The warrior who surrenders is worse than dead. He is a ghost, a shame to his ancestors, a stain on his family name. Tanaka had tried. When the order came to abandon ship, when the captain gave the final command, Tanaka had gone below deck instead. He had stood in the magazine room, surrounded by shells and explosives, and waited for the end. Death before dishonor. That was the code. That was the way. But then an American submarine had surfaced, USS Nautilus. A young sailor, barely 20 years old, had pulled Tanaka from the water. The boy had looked at him with eyes that held no hatred. No triumph, just exhaustion and something that might have been pity. War is war, the American had said. But drowning is drowning. Come on, sailor. And Tanaka had lived. Now with 2 weeks still remaining before reaching San Francisco, he sat in the hold of an American transport ship and wondered if that young sailor had done him a mercy or a curse. The propaganda officer's voice still rang in his ears. Major Yamamoto had visited the survivors 3 days before they shipped out to America. He had walked among them like a priest among the condemned delivering his final sermon. Listen carefully, Yamamoto had said, his voice cold and precise. The Americans will torture you. They are savages. They have no concept of honor, no understanding of the warrior's soul. They will feed you scraps like dogs. They will beat you. They will humiliate you. Some of you will not survive. For those who do remember this, you are still soldiers of the Emperor. You will observe. You will remember. And one day, when the tide of war turns, you will tell us everything you have learned. But until that day, expect no mercy. The Americans know only cruelty. Tanaka had believed every word. Why wouldn't he? He had been raised on stories of American barbarism. The teachers at school had shown pictures, told tales, painted vivid images of a nation without culture, without honor, without humanity. A nation of cowboys and criminals. A nation that cared only for money and power and the subjugation of the colored races. The ship's engines changed pitch. The steady thrum became a lower growl. They were slowing down, approaching port. Around him the other prisoners stirred. Some whispered prayers to ancestors. Some sat in stoic silence. One young sergeant, barely 19, began to cry quietly, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Tanaka wanted to comfort him, wanted to say something about honor, about duty, about maintaining dignity in the face of the enemy. But the words stuck in his throat. What comfort could he offer? What dignity remained to men who had chosen life over death? The hatch above them opened with a metallic clang. Bright sunlight poured down like water, blinding after the darkness of the hold. American voices called out commands. The prisoners began to move, shuffling in their chains toward the ladder, toward whatever fate awaited them on American soil. Tanaka stood slowly, his muscles stiff from days of sitting. He moved toward the ladder with the others, climbed up into the light, and emerged onto the deck of the USS Liberty. The first thing that struck him was the air. Clean, cool, nothing like the humid, suffocating heat of the Pacific Islands where his war had ended. The second thing was the city. San Francisco rose before him like something from a dream. Buildings tall as mountains, streets that stretched to the horizon, ships and cranes and warehouses that seemed to go on forever. This was the enemy's homeland. This was the heart of the beast, and it was bigger than anything Tanaka had imagined. An American corporal stood at the gangplank, checking names against a clipboard. He was young, maybe 23 or 24, with red hair and pale skin that had burned pink in the California sun. His uniform was crisp. His boots were polished. His face was set in an expression of careful neutrality, neither friendly nor hostile. When Tanaka reached him, the corporal looked up, met his eyes for just a moment, then looked back down at his list. Name and rank, the corporal said in English. Tanaka had learned some English at the Naval Academy. Enough to understand. Enough to respond. Lieutenant Hiroshi Tanaka, he said, his voice rough from disuse. Imperial Japanese Navy. The corporal made a mark on his clipboard, then gestured toward a waiting truck. That one, he said. Move along, no insult, no mockery, no violence. Just the simple businesslike efficiency of a man doing his job. Tanaka walked toward the truck, his mind racing. This was not what he had expected. This was not what he had been told to expect. The drive to the camp took 40 minutes. Tanaka sat in the back of the covered truck with 19 other prisoners, bouncing along roads that seemed impossibly smooth compared to the rutted tracks he remembered from his time in China. Through the open flap at the back, he caught glimpses of the city, shops, cars, people walking on sidewalks carrying packages, going about their lives as if there were no war at all. Women in colorful dresses, children playing in a park, an old man sitting on a bench reading a newspaper in the afternoon sun. This was the enemy, these people living their ordinary lives in their ordinary city. Then the truck turned off the main road and followed a narrower path along the bay. Ahead, Tanaka could see a cluster of buildings surrounded by a high fence topped with barbed wire, guard towers at each corner, searchlights mounted on tall poles. This looked more like what he had expected. This looked like a prison. The truck stopped at the main gate. Guards checked papers. The gate swung open. They drove inside. POW Camp Number 5 was not large, perhaps 2 acres, maybe less. A dozen wooden barracks arranged in neat rows, a central yard with a flagpole, administration buildings, a mess hall, all of it surrounded by 2 layers of fence with a 10-foot gap between them, a kill zone designed to stop anyone foolish enough to attempt escape. The prisoners were unloaded, lined up, counted. An American captain emerged from one of the buildings flanked by 2 armed guards. He was older than the corporal at the docks, maybe 55, with gray hair and the weathered face of a man who had spent years in the sun. He walked with a slight limp favoring his right leg. The captain stopped in front of the assembled prisoners and looked them over with the practiced eye of a man who had seen many such groups before. Gentlemen, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the yard, my name is Captain William Fletcher. I am the commanding officer of this facility. You are prisoners of war of the United States of America, and you will be treated in accordance with the Geneva Convention. He paused, letting those words sink in. That means, he continued, that you will be given adequate food, adequate shelter, and adequate medical care. You will be expected to work, but you will be paid for your labor, according to international law. You will be allowed to write letters to your families through the International Red Cross. You will not be tortured. You will not be abused. You will be treated as prisoners of war with the dignity that status entails. Another pause. Fletcher's eyes swept across the faces before him. However, he said, his tone hardening slightly, you will obey the rules of this camp. You will obey the orders of the guards. Any attempt to escape will be met with force. Any act of violence against American personnel will result in solitary confinement. Any refusal to work will result in reduced rations. Is that understood? No one answered. The prisoners stood in silence. Fletcher nodded as if he had expected nothing else. Sergeant Williams will assign you to your barracks, he said. You will be given uniforms, bedding, and basic supplies. Dinner is at 1800 hours. Dismissed. He turned and walked back toward the administration building, his limp more pronounced now that he was no longer standing at attention. The sergeant, a thick-shouldered man with a Missouri accent, began calling out names and barracks numbers. Tanaka found himself assigned to Barracks 7 along with 19 other prisoners. As they walked toward their new home, he noticed the other barracks were already occupied. Men in prison uniforms sat outside in the sun, some reading, some talking quietly, some just staring at nothing. They looked healthy, well-fed, not beaten, not starved, not tortured. Tanaka felt the first small crack in his certainty. Inside Barracks 7, each man was given a bed with a thin mattress, a pillow, and 2 wool blankets, a footlocker for personal items, a small table and chair. The building was clean, the floors were swept, there were windows that opened to let in fresh air. This was a prison. This was the torture chamber he had been warned about. A voice spoke from the doorway. Tanaka turned to see a young American soldier, maybe 23 years old, holding a stack of folded clothes. Prison uniforms, the soldier said, his English sharp, with an accent Tanaka couldn't place. New York, maybe, or Boston. One for each of you. You'll wear these at all times while in camp. Your own clothes will be stored. Anyone got questions? No one answered. The soldier set the stack of uniforms on the nearest bed and turned to leave. Then he paused, looked back at the assembled prisoners, and something flickered across his face. Not hatred, not contempt. Something else. Something that might have been curiosity, or perhaps a kind of wary respect. Dinner's at 6, he said. Don't be late. The food ain't fancy, but there's enough of it. Then he was gone. Tanaka picked up one of the uniforms. Blue denim shirt, blue denim pants. Simple, utilitarian, but clean, freshly laundered. He held it for a long moment, feeling the fabric between his fingers, trying to understand. This was not what he had expected. None of this was what he had expected. That first night, Tanaka refused to eat. The mess hall was a long wooden building with rows of tables and benches. The American guards stood at the sides, weapons ready, but not aimed. The prisoners filed and collected metal trays from a stack and moved through a serving line where other American soldiers spooned food onto the trays. Tanaka took a tray because to refuse would have drawn attention. He moved through the line and accepted the food that was placed before him. Then he sat at one of the tables with the other men from his barracks and stared at what he had been given. Bacon, 3 strips of thick-cut bacon fried until the edges were crispy, scrambled eggs still steaming, 2 slices of white bread with a pat of butter, a cup of coffee. This was prisoner food. The man next to him, Sergeant Kenji Nakamura, leaned close and whispered in Japanese. Do not eat it, Nakamura said. It could be poisoned or drugged. They want us weak, compliant. Tanaka nodded. That made sense. That was logical. The Americans would not feed their prisoners well out of kindness. There had to be a reason. There had to be a trick. He pushed his tray away and sat with his hands in his lap, watching the other prisoners. Most were eating slowly at first, then with increasing speed as hunger overcame caution. A few, like Tanaka and Nakamura, left their trays untouched. The young soldier from earlier, the one who had distributed the uniforms, walked past their table. He paused when he saw Tanaka's full tray. Not hungry, he asked. Tanaka said nothing. The soldier shrugged. Suit yourself, Jap. Starve if you want. Makes no difference to me. He walked on. Tanaka felt anger rise in his chest at the slur. Jap. The casual contempt of it. The reduction of his entire people, his entire culture, to a single syllable of disgust. This was the truth beneath the veneer of civility. This was the reality of American hatred. He would not eat their food. He would not accept their false kindness. He would maintain his dignity even if it cost him his life. For 3 days, Tanaka ate nothing. His body weakened. His head began to ache. His stomach cramped with hunger. But he endured. This was a test of will, a test of honor. He would not break. On the morning of the fourth day, the young soldier appeared in the doorway of Barrack 7. His name was O'Brien. Tanaka had heard the other guards call him that. Corporal O'Brien. O'Brien walked directly to Tanaka's bed, where Tanaka lay staring at the ceiling, too weak to sit up. "All right, enough of this," O'Brien said, his voice hard. "Regulations say you gotta eat. I don't care if you want to or not. You're gonna eat, or I'm gonna have the doctor force feed you through a tube. Your choice." He dropped a metal tray onto the bed beside Tanaka. The smell hit Tanaka like a physical force. "Bacon, eggs, toast, coffee. Eat," O'Brien said. "Now." Tanaka turned his head to look at the young corporal. O'Brien's face was set in an expression of stubborn determination. His jaw was clenched, his eyes were cold. But beneath the surface, another emotion flickered. A flicker of something that might have been concern, or frustration, or perhaps even a kind of exhausted compassion. Tanaka looked at the food, his stomach clenched with need. His body screamed for sustenance. And somewhere buried deep beneath the layers of propaganda and indoctrination and pride, a small voice whispered a simple truth. "You are going to die if you do not eat." And what honor is there in dying of stubbornness? Slowly moving as if in a dream, Tanaka reached for a piece of bacon. He brought it to his mouth, hesitated for one final moment, then bit down. The taste exploded across his tongue. Salt, fat, smoke, richness beyond anything he had eaten in months of military rations. The bacon was crispy on the edges, tenders in the middle, perfectly cooked. It was quite simply the most delicious thing he had ever tasted. He chewed, swallowed, reached for another piece. O'Brien watched for a moment, then nodded. "Good," he said. "Keep that up." He turned and walked away. Tanaka ate everything on the tray. The bacon, the eggs, the toast with its melting butter, the coffee bitter and hot, embracing. When he was done, he lay back on his bed and felt strength beginning to return to his limbs. And a new sensation stirred within him. Unfamiliar, unsettling, a confusion, a doubt, a small crack in the wall of certainty that had surrounded him all his life. Why would the enemy feed him bacon June 7th, 1943, the day before the disaster? Tanaka had been at Camp Number 5 for 2 weeks. In that time, the world he thought he knew had begun to crumble. The food was good, not just adequate, not just sufficient, but genuinely good. 3 meals a day, meat at every meal, fresh vegetables, fruit, bread that was soft and white, and tasted nothing like the hard black loaves he had eaten in the Imperial Navy. Coffee that was rich and strong, milk that was cold and sweet. The work was reasonable, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week with weekends off. The prisoners were assigned to various tasks around the shipyard: painting, cleaning, loading supplies, nothing military, nothing that violated the Geneva Convention. And they were paid 80 cents a day, deposited into accounts they could use to buy personal items from the camp store. Soap, toothpaste, cigarettes, candy, small luxuries that made the days a little more bearable. The guards were professional. Some were friendly, some were cold, none were cruel. There had been no beatings, no torture, no deliberate humiliation. Just the routine enforcement of camp rules carried out with the same businesslike efficiency that seemed to characterize everything the Americans did. And Tanaka found himself more confused with each passing day. On the afternoon of June 7th, he was assigned to work detail near the docks. His job was to help paint the exterior of a warehouse. Simple work, mindless work, the kind of task that left the mind free to wander. From his position on the scaffolding, he could see the massive shape of the USS Defiance anchored in the bay. Even from a distance, the battleship was impressive. 42,000 tons of steel, 8 16-inch guns in 4 turrets, armor plating thick enough to stop any shell in the Japanese arsenal. A symbol of American power. a symbol of everything his nation was fighting against. And yet, as he watched the tiny figures of American sailors moving about on the distant deck, Tanaka found himself thinking not about the ship as a weapon, but about the men who served aboard her. Men like himself, sailors who had joined the Navy for duty, or adventure, or simply because it was expected of them. Men who wrote letters home to mothers and wives and children. Men who probably ate bacon for breakfast and complained about the coffee and missed their families. Men who were perhaps not so different from him. The thought was dangerous, subversive, a betrayal of everything he had been taught, and yet once it had entered his mind, he could not dislodge it. Movement caught his eye. A figure approaching it along the dock. Corporal O'Brien walking with that quick, efficient stride that seemed to be his natural pace. He stopped at the base of the scaffolding and looked up. "Tanaka," he called. "Captain wants to see you." Now. Tanaka climbed down carefully, his heart suddenly racing. Had he done something wrong? Was this the moment when the mask would finally slip, when the true nature of American cruelty would be revealed? He followed O'Brien across the yard toward the administration building, trying to keep his face neutral, his breathing steady. Inside, Captain Fletcher sat behind a desk covered with papers and maps. He looked up when Tanaka entered, gestured to a chair. "Sit down, Lieutenant," he said. Tanaka sat keeping his back straight, his hands on his knees. Fletcher studied him for a moment, then slid a piece of paper across the desk. "This arrived for you this morning," he said, "from the International Red Cross. A letter from your family." Tanaka stared at the envelope as if it were a live grenade. A letter. From home. From his mother, perhaps, or his sister. From the family he had shamed with his surrender. His hands trembled as he picked it up. "You can read it here or take it back to your barracks," Fletcher said. "Your choice." Tanaka looked up at the captain, searching for the trap, the trick, the cruelty that must surely be hiding beneath this apparent kindness. Why, he asked the word escaping before he could stop it. "Why do you give this to me?" Fletcher's expression didn't change. "Because it's your mail, Lieutenant," he said simply. "Because even in war, a man has the right to hear from his family. That's what the Geneva Convention says. That's what we follow." He stood up, signaling the end of the conversation. That's all he said. Dismissed. Tanaka walked back to his barracks in a daze, the letter clutched in his hand like something precious and fragile. Inside alone, he opened it with shaking fingers. The handwriting was his mother's. Small, precise. The characters formed with the careful elegance she had learned as a girl. "My dear Hiroshi," the letter began. "We received word that you are alive and being held in America. Your sister and I are grateful to the gods for your survival. We pray for your safe return. The village is quiet now. Your father is gone. He could not bear the shame of your surrender. He took his life 3 days after we received the news. He left no note. He spoke no final words. He simply went to the garden at dawn and opened his veins in the traditional way. I do not blame you, my son. I know you faced an impossible choice, but I tell you this so that you understand the weight of what has happened, the weight of what you carry. Live with honor in your captivity. Remember who you are. Remember what you represent. And come home to us when this terrible war is over. Your loving mother." Tanaka read the letter 3 times. Then he carefully folded it, placed it in his footlocker, and walked outside into the dying light of the afternoon. He stood in the yard looking out across the barbed wire fence toward the bay, toward the USS Defiance floating peaceful and enormous in the golden light of sunset. His father was dead. Dead because Tanaka had chosen life over honor. Dead because Tanaka had allowed himself to be saved by an American boy who thought drowning was worse than surrender. And now, in this place, this American prison that was not really a prison, Tanaka was being fed bacon and given letters from home and treated like a human being by men he had been taught to see as demons. The world made no sense anymore. Nothing made sense. Tomorrow, he thought. Tomorrow I will try to understand. Tomorrow I will figure out what any of this means. He had no way of knowing that tomorrow everything would change. That tomorrow, in the space of 4 minutes, his entire understanding of honor and duty and humanity would be torn apart and rebuilt into something new. Tomorrow the USS Defiance would explode, and Hiroshi Tanaka would have to choose between the propaganda of his past and the truth standing right in front of him, drowning in cold water, and crying out for help. But that was tomorrow. Tonight he stood in the fading light and mourned his father and tried to make sense of a world where the enemy fed you bacon and let you read letters from home. Tomorrow would bring answers, terrible, transformative answers. Tonight there was only confusion and grief and the first small seeds of doubt taking root in soil that had been hardened by years of hatred. The sun set over San Francisco Bay. The lights came on in the guard towers. Somewhere in the distance, a ship's horn sounded low and mournful. Tanaka went inside, lay down on his bed, and closed his eyes. Tomorrow, June 8th, 1943. Morning. Tanaka woke to the sound of a bell ringing across the camp yard. 6 o'clock. The start of another day in this strange American prison that felt less like a prison with each passing hour. He dressed in his blue denim uniform, splashed water on his face from the basin near the door, and joined the other men from his barracks as they filed toward the mess hall for breakfast. The routine had become familiar now, comforting even in its predictability. Line up, collect a tray, move through the serving line, sit, eat, return the tray, report for work detail. Simple, orderly, nothing like the chaos and uncertainty of war. This morning the bacon was especially good, thick cut, perfectly crispy on the edges. The eggs were fresh, the yolks bright yellow and rich. The coffee was hot and strong enough to chase away the last cobwebs of sleep. Tanaka ate slowly, savoring each bite, still amazed that this was considered standard prisoner fare. Across the table, Sergeant Nakamura was reading a 2-day-old copy of the San Francisco Chronicle that one of the guards had left behind. His English was better than Tanaka's, and he sometimes translated interesting articles for the others. It says here the Allies are advancing in Sicily, Nakamura said quietly, his finger tracing the lines of text. The Italians are collapsing. Germany is sending reinforcements, but it may be too late. Another prisoner, a young sailor named Yoshida, shook his head. The Americans control the information, he said. Who knows what is true and what is propaganda? Nakamura shrugged. Perhaps, but the photographs look real enough. Tanaka said nothing. He had stopped trying to figure out what was true and what was lies. The world had become too complicated for simple answers. At 7:30, they assembled in the yard for work assignments. Tanaka and 15 others were assigned to continue the painting detail at the warehouse near the docks. The same work they had been doing for 3 days. Mindless, repetitive, but not difficult. They walked in a loose group toward the gate, escorted by 2 guards. Corporal O'Brien was one of them. He walked slightly behind the prisoners, his rifle slung over his shoulder, his eyes scanning the surroundings with the practiced alertness of a man who took his duty seriously but expected no trouble. The morning was beautiful. Clear blue sky, cool breeze off the bay, gulls wheeling and crying overhead. The kind of morning that made you forget for just a moment that the world was tearing itself apart in a war that had already claimed millions of lives. They reached the warehouse at 8 o'clock and began setting up the scaffolding and paint supplies. The work was familiar now. Tanaka found a kind of peace in the simple physicality of it. Dip the brush, apply the paint. Long, smooth strokes. Watch the weathered wood transform under a fresh coat of white. From his position on the scaffolding, he could see the USS Defiance clearly. The battleship sat at anchor about 200 yards away, her massive hull rising from the water like a steel cliff. Even at rest, she radiated power. The kind of power that had dominated naval warfare for half a century. The kind of power that was supposed to decide the outcome of wars. Tanaka watched the tiny figures of American sailors moving about on her decks, going about their morning routines, maintenance, inspections, the endless tasks that kept a warship functional. He wondered what they were thinking, if they missed home, if they were afraid, if they ever looked toward the prison camp and wondered about the men behind the wire. At noon, the work detail stopped for lunch. The guards distributed sandwiches and canteens of water. Tanaka sat on a stack of lumber eating roast beef on white bread, drinking cool water, watching the bay. Peaceful. That was the word that kept coming to mind. Despite the war, despite everything, this moment was peaceful. He checked his watch. 12:11. In 2 minutes, they would return to work. In 2 minutes, this ordinary day would continue its ordinary progress. He had no way of knowing he was wrong. He had no way of knowing that in exactly 2 minutes, ordinary would end forever. 12:13. The explosion came without warning. One moment Tanaka was chewing his sandwich, watching a seagull dive for something in the water. The next moment, the world turned into fire and thunder and chaos. The sound hit him first. This was deeper than any rifle crack, bigger than any cannon boom. A sound so massive it seemed to come from everywhere at once, from the air itself, from the ground beneath his feet. A sound that rattled his bones and made his ears ring and punch the air from his lungs. Then the shockwave, an invisible wall of pressure that slammed into him and knocked him backward off the lumber pile. He hit the ground hard, the sandwich flying from his hand, his body bouncing once on the packed earth. For a moment he couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what had just happened. Then his training kicked in, years of discipline, years of drills. He rolled onto his stomach, covered his head with his arms, made himself small against whatever was coming next. But nothing else came. Just the echoing aftermath of that terrible sound rolling across the water, bouncing off the hills, fading slowly into a ringing silence. Tanaka lifted his head. Where the USS Defiance had been, there was now a column of smoke. Black, dense, rising straight up into the clear blue sky like some terrible monument. At the base of the column, flames, orange and red and white, and around the flames the ship itself, wounded, dying, already beginning to list to one side. The entire stern section was gone, simply gone. Where there had been two massive gun turrets and hundreds of feet of armored deck, there was now nothing but twisted metal and fire. The explosion had torn the ship apart like a child tearing paper. Even as Tanaka watched, frozen in horror and disbelief, a second explosion erupted. Smaller than the first, but still massive. The remaining ammunition cooking off in the heat. More fire, more smoke, more destruction. And now finally he could hear the screaming. The ship was too far away for him to hear individual voices. The screaming came from the men around him. The other prisoners, knocked down by the shockwave, now scrambling to their feet, shouting in Japanese, pointing at the dying battleship. What happened? What was that? Are we under attack? The guards were shouting too in English, trying to restore order, trying to understand. O'Brien had been knocked down as well. He was climbing to his feet now, his face pale, his eyes wide with shock. He stared at the USS Defiance for 3 seconds. Then he grabbed his radio. "Base, this is O'Brien," he said, his voice tight and controlled. "USS Defiance just exploded. I say again, Defiance just exploded. Magazine detonation, the stern is gone. Ship is listing hard. We need all available rescue personnel to the bay immediately." The radio crackled. "Roger that. All units respond. Captain Fletcher is en route." O'Brien turned to the other guard, a private named Spiller. "Get them back to camp," he said, gesturing at the prisoners. "Now, I'm going to help with rescue." He sprinted toward the bay. Tanaka stood slowly, his eyes still fixed on the burning ship. The list was increasing. 10 degrees, 15, 20. The physics of it were inexorable. Thousands of tons of water pouring into the massive hole where the stern had been. The ship's center of gravity shifting, the angle increasing. She was going to capsize. Soon. Maybe minutes. Maybe less. And there were men on that ship. Hundreds of men, sailors who had been eating their lunch or sleeping in their bunks or standing watch on the bridge. Men who were now trapped in compartments that were flooding. Men who were jumping into the cold water to escape the flames. Men who were drowning. The image flashed into Tanaka's mind unbidden. His own ship at Midway. The destroyer Akatsuki. The fire spreading, the water rushing in. The terrible choice between burning and drowning. The moment when survival became more important than honor. And the American boy on the submarine. The one who had pulled him from the water. War is war, but drowning is drowning. Tanaka looked around. The other prisoners stood in shocked silence, watching the disaster unfold. Private Miller was trying to herd them back toward the gate, but no one was moving. Everyone was transfixed by the terrible beauty of the dying ship. And then Tanaka looked toward the bay, looked at the men in the water. Hundreds of them now. Some swimming strongly, some struggling, some floating face down, already gone. The water was slicked with oil, black and viscous and deadly. If that oil caught fire, everyone in the water would die screaming. Corporal O'Brien was running along the dock now, pulling off his boots, preparing to dive in. Other guards were doing the same. Dock workers were launching small boats. Sailors from other ships were jumping into the water to help, but it wouldn't be enough. There were too many men, too much water, too little time. The USS Defiance groaned, a sound like a dying whale, metal tearing, rivets popping. The list increased to 30 degrees. 40. Men were sliding off the tilting deck into the water. Others were clinging to whatever they could grab, trying to hold on, trying to survive just a few seconds longer. Tanaka made his decision. He turned to Private Miller, who was still trying to get the prisoners to move. Private Miller, Tanaka said in his careful English, "We can help. We can swim. We can save your men." Miller stared at him as if he had spoken in Chinese. "What? No, you're prisoners. I have to get you back to camp." Tanaka pointed at the water, at the drowning men. "Your men die now," he said. "We swim good. We help. You watch us. We not escape. We help." Miller's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, suspicion, uncertainty, and then finally something that might have been desperate hope. "Wait here," he said. "Don't move." He ran toward a jeep that had just pulled up where Captain Fletcher was climbing out. Tanaka couldn't hear the conversation, but he could see the gestures. Miller pointing at the prisoners, pointing at the water, Fletcher's face going hard with thought, calculating, weighing duty against necessity, rules against reality. Then Fletcher was walking toward them fast, his limp more pronounced than usual. He stopped in front of Tanaka. "Lieutenant," he said, his voice clipped, imprecise. "If I open that gate, how many of your men will volunteer to help?" Tanaka turned to face the other prisoners. Switched to Japanese. "Brothers," he said, his voice carrying across the group, "those men in the water are drowning. They are sailors like us. They are not demons. They are not monsters. They are men with families and mothers and children. Men who pulled us from the ocean at Midway. Men who have fed us and clothed us and treated us with dignity." He paused, looked each man in the eye. "I am going to swim out there and save as many as I can," he said. "Who will come with me?" For 3 seconds, no one moved. Then Sergeant Nakamura stepped forward. "I will come." Then Yoshida, "I will come." Then another, and another, and another. 197 men stepped forward. Out of 200 prisoners, 197 volunteered to jump into San Francisco Bay and save the Americans who held them captive. Only 3 men stayed back. 2 were injured from old wounds. 1 was simply too afraid. Captain Fletcher stared at the assembled volunteers, his face unreadable. Then he nodded once, sharp and decisive. Private Miller opened the gate. "Anyone who wants to help, let them go. The rest stay here with 2 guards. O'Brien is already in the water. Tell him the prisoners are coming to assist. Tell them they're friendlies." He looked at Tanaka. "Thank you, Lieutenant," he said quietly. "This is beyond duty. This is humanity." Tanaka bowed slightly. "You teach us humanity, Captain. We just give back." The gate opened. 197 Japanese prisoners of war ran towards San Francisco Bay, pulling off their shirts as they ran, leaving them in piles on the dock. 197 men dove into the cold water, into the oil slick, into the chaos of the drowning and the dying. And Tanaka was first among them. The water was cold, 58 degrees, cold enough to steal your breath. Cold enough to make your muscles cramp if you stayed in too long. But Tanaka barely noticed. His mind was focused on one thing: the men struggling in the water, the men who needed help. He swam hard, his strokes clean and efficient. Years of training in the Imperial Navy. Years of swimming in the ocean around Japan. This was what his body knew how to do. Ahead of him, maybe 30 yards, a man was struggling, going under, coming up, thrashing weakly. Tanaka altered his course, kicked harder, closed the distance. When he reached the man, he saw it was just a boy. 17, maybe 18. Blonde hair, blue eyes wide with panic and fear. A seaman's uniform soaked and heavy, dragging him down. Tanaka grabbed him from behind the approved rescue position and pulled him up so his head was above water. The boy tried to struggle, tried to fight. "No," Tanaka said firmly. "No fight. I help, I save. You swim. We go." But the boy didn't seem to hear. He kept thrashing, kept panicking, his hands grabbing at Tanaka, trying to climb up, pushing Tanaka under. Tanaka had no choice. He pulled the boy's head back, looked him straight in the eye. "You listen," he said, his English breaking down under stress but his meaning clear. "I save you. You trust. You no fight or we both die. Understand? Something in his voice or maybe just exhaustion got through. The boy stopped struggling, went limp. Let Tanaka support him. Good, Tanaka said. Now we swim. He began the long swim back to shore, one arm wrapped around the boy's chest, the other stroking his legs, kicking steadily. The boy was heavy, dead weight. But Tanaka had done this drill 100 times in training. He knew how to pace himself, how to conserve energy, how to keep both their heads above water. It took 3 minutes to reach the shallows where other hands could help. American hands, guards and dock workers pulling the boy onto the wooden pier, wrapping him in a blanket. The boy was coughing, spitting up seawater and oil, but he was alive. The boy looked up at Tanaka, who still stood in chest-deep water. You, he said, his voice hoarse. You're a Jap. Why? Tanaka didn't answer. He just turned and swam back out into the bay. There were more men in the water, more men who needed help. Around him, the other prisoners were doing the same. Nakamura was pulling 2 men at once, one under each arm. Yoshida was helping an American corpsman load injured sailors into a small boat. A young prisoner named Sato was diving down again and again, pulling men up from below the surface, where they had sunk in their heavy boots and waterlogged uniforms. And everywhere the same scene repeated. Japanese prisoners saving American sailors. Enemy saving enemy. The propaganda on both sides proven false by simple human action. Tanaka made 4 trips, 4 men pulled from the water, 4 lives saved. On his 5th trip out, he saw something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. An older man, late 30s or early 40s, floating face up in the water, conscious but barely. His face was gray, his lips were blue. Blood streamed from a deep wound on his shoulder where a jagged piece of shrapnel had torn clean through the muscle. The bleeding was severe, but the man remained conscious. Tanaka swam to him, got the rescue grip, pulled him back toward shore. The man's eyes focused on Tanaka's face. Recognition flickered there. And something else. Confusion. Disbelief. You're Japanese, the man said, his voice barely a whisper. Yes, Tanaka said. Why are you helping me? Tanaka kept swimming, kept moving, but he answered. Because you are sailor, he said. I am sailor. Water not choose side. Death not choose side. We just men. The older man's eyes filled with tears. Or maybe it was just seawater. But his hand came up, gripped Tanaka's arm. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you, son. They reached the pier. Willing hands pulled the older man up. Someone shouted that he needed a medic, now he's bleeding out. People rushed to help. The man looked down at Tanaka one more time. What's your name? He asked. Lieutenant Hiroshi Tanaka, Imperial Japanese Navy. The man nodded slowly. Chief Petty Officer Samuel Morrison, United States Navy. I won't forget this, Lieutenant. I won't forget you. Then he was gone, carried away on a stretcher, and Tanaka was swimming back out for the 6th time. But there would be no 6th rescue, because at 12:17, exactly 4 minutes after the initial explosion, the USS Defiance gave up her fight. The great battleship rolled, completely over. 42,000 tons of steel capsizing like a toy boat in a bathtub. The bottom of the ship, painted red, turned toward the sky. The superstructure, the bridge, the gun turrets all disappeared beneath the surface. For a moment, the ship seemed to pause, balanced on its side as if reconsidering. Then gravity took over. The USS Defiance slid beneath the waters of San Francisco Bay, sinking stern first faster and faster, pulling down. With her a maelstrom of water and debris and lost hopes. The suction was terrible. Men in the water were pulled under, dragged down by the dying ship. Tanaka felt it too. Felt the current trying to grab him, pull him to the bottom. He swam as hard as he could, perpendicular to the current, fighting against physics itself. And then it was over. The ship was gone. Resting on the bottom in 130 feet of water, her hull a dark shadow visible through the murky green, her masts and superstructure buried in mud. Silence fell across the bay. A terrible, complete silence. No more explosions, no more screaming, just the quiet lapping of waves and the ragged breathing of exhausted men. Tanaka treaded water, looking around. Oil everywhere, debris everywhere, bodies everywhere, some living, some not. And scattered among them, Japanese prisoners and American sailors and dock workers and guards, all of them too exhausted to do anything but float and breathe and try to process what had just happened. A boat pulled up beside Tanaka. Hands reached down. He let them pull him up, too tired to help, too tired to resist. He lay on the bottom of the boat water, streaming from his hair, his body shaking with cold and exertion. Someone put a blanket around his shoulders. "You did good," a voice said. American voice. Grateful voice. "You did real good." Tanaka didn't respond. He just closed his eyes and tried to catch his breath. On the shore, Captain Fletcher stood with a clipboard taking count. Rescue workers moved among the survivors, sorting injured from uninjured, treating wounds, distributing blankets and coffee. The final numbers would take hours to compile, but the rough count was already clear. 768 American sailors dead, most killed in the initial explosion or trapped below decks when the ship capsized. Gone in 4 minutes. 353 survivors, pulled from the water by rescue crews, by dock workers, by guards, and by 197 Japanese prisoners who had every reason to let their captors drown and every reason to hate the nation that held them. Of those 353 survivors, 87 owed their lives directly to the actions of enemy combatants who chose humanity over hatred. 87 men who would never forget. Tanaka sat on the pier wrapped in his blanket, watching the organized chaos of the rescue effort wind down. Around him, other prisoners were being gathered up, counted, prepared to return to camp. Some were crying, some were staring at nothing. All were exhausted beyond words. Corporal O'Brien appeared dripping wet, his uniform ruined. He stopped in front of Tanaka, looked down at him for a long moment. Then he held out his hand. Tanaka looked at the offered hand, looked up at O'Brien's face, saw something there that hadn't been there before. Respect, recognition, the acknowledgement of one warrior to another. He took the hand. O'Brien pulled him to his feet. "I was wrong about you," O'Brien said quietly. "I thought you were just another Jap, another enemy. I was wrong." Tanaka nodded. "I was wrong too," he said. "I thought you were demon. You are not demon. You are man." For a moment, they stood there, two soldiers on opposite sides of a war, connected by something that transcended uniforms and flags and national loyalties. Then voices began calling across the pier. A black sedan pulled up, mud splashing from its tires. The door opened and a figure emerged. Colonel Harrison from the Pentagon. Fletcher stiffened when he saw him. Harrison was known for one thing: absolute adherence to regulations regardless of circumstances. Harrison strode toward Fletcher, his uniform still crisp and clean despite the chaos around him. "Captain Fletcher," he called out, his voice sharp, "get those prisoners back behind the wire. Now." Fletcher stood to object. "Sir, these men just saved 87 American lives." "I don't care if they saved the president himself," Harrison snapped. "They're enemy combatants. They go back to camp. That's an order." O'Brien's face went hard. He looked at Tanaka and something like shame flickered in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Tanaka bowed slightly. "You do job," he said. "I understand." The prisoners were marched back to camp, through the gate, into the yard. The wire closed behind them with a metallic clang that seemed louder than it should have been. As Tanaka walked toward his barracks, he looked back once at the bay, at the oil slick, at the boat still searching for bodies, at the empty space where the USS Defiance had been. 4 minutes, that's all it had taken. 4 minutes to kill 768 men. 4 minutes to prove that propaganda was a lie. 4 minutes to show that humanity could survive even in the middle of war. 4 minutes that had changed everything. He went inside, lay down on his bed and closed his eyes. His body ached, his muscles burned. His skin reeked of oil and seawater. But something else had changed too, something inside. Some fundamental understanding of who he was and who the Americans were and what any of this meant. The enemy had fed him bacon, had let him read letters from home, had treated him like a human being. And when their ship exploded, he had jumped into the water to save them. Not because of orders, not because of duty, but because it was the right thing to do. Because beneath the uniforms and the flags and the propaganda, they were all just men. Sailors. Brothers in the only way that really mattered. Outside, the sun was setting over San Francisco Bay. The lights came on in the guard towers. Somewhere a bell rang for dinner. But Tanaka didn't move. He just lay there processing, trying to understand what he had learned in those 4 terrible transformative minutes. Tomorrow he thought the world will try to make sense of this. Tomorrow there will be questions and investigations and official statements. But tonight in this moment, the only truth that mattered was simple. He had saved American lives. And in doing so, he had saved something else, something more important. He had saved his own humanity. And perhaps, just perhaps, that was worth more than honor, more than duty, more than all the propaganda and hatred and war. Perhaps that was worth everything. June 9th, 1943. Morning. The sun rose over San Francisco Bay, indifferent to the tragedy that had unfolded beneath its light just 24 hours earlier. The water was calm again, peaceful. Only the oil slick remained a dark stain spreading slowly toward the shore, marking the grave of 768 American sailors. Inside POW Camp Number 5, Tanaka woke to the same bell that had wakened him every morning for 2 weeks. But this morning was different. This morning, the weight of what had happened sat on his chest like a stone. He had saved 4 American lives with his own hands, had watched 196 of his fellow prisoners do the same, had seen the gratitude in the eyes of Chief Morrison as strong hands pulled him from the water. And then they had been marched back behind the wire as if nothing had changed, as if those 4 minutes had meant nothing, as if saving 87 lives was just another detail to be noted in some official report and then forgotten. Tanaka lay on his bed and stared at the ceiling and wondered what happened next. The answer came 3 days later. On June 12th, a guard Tanaka didn't recognize appeared at the door of Barrack 7. He looked nervous, young, maybe 20 years old. He scanned the room until his eyes found Tanaka. "Lieutenant Tanaka," he said, "someone wants to see you outside." Tanaka followed the guard into the yard. Near the main gate, standing in the morning sun, was Chief Morrison. He looked different than he had in the water, older somehow, gray-faced. His right shoulder was wrapped in heavy bandages, the arm held in a sling. But he was alive, standing, waiting. The guard stopped 10 feet from the fence. "5 minutes," he said. "That's all I can give you." He walked away far enough to give them privacy, close enough to intervene if needed. Morrison stepped closer to the wire. Up close, Tanaka could see the exhaustion in his face, the lines around his eyes, the weariness that went deeper than physical injury. Lieutenant Morrison said, his voice rough, "I wanted to thank you, properly, for what you did." Tanaka shook his head. "No need thank. You would do same." Morrison smiled slightly. "Maybe, maybe not. But you did it. You and your men. 87 of us are alive because you jumped in that water. That's not nothing, son. That's everything." He shifted the package he was carrying under his good arm. "I brought you something," he said. "It's not much, but I wanted you to have it." He passed the package through the wire. Tanaka took it, felt the weight of it, the careful wrapping. "What is this?" "Open it later," Morrison said. "When you're alone, it's from my family, from me. A small thank you for a very big gift." He paused, seemed to be gathering his words. "I'm writing a letter," he said, "to the Navy Department. 87 of us are writing it together. All the men you pulled out of the water. We're asking them to give you and your men special recognition, better conditions, more privileges. It's the least we can do." Tanaka felt something catch in his throat. "Chief Morrison," he said carefully, "you not have to do this. We do what is right. That is enough." Morrison's face hardened. "No," he said firmly, "it's not enough. You saved our lives. The Navy needs to acknowledge that. The country needs to know what you did. That's not just right, Lieutenant. That's necessary." He glanced back at the guard who was checking his watch. "I have to go," Morrison said, "but I won't forget this. None of us will. You have my word." He paused, then added quietly, "You'll understand when you read the letter. But know this, what you did will echo through generations." He nodded once, then walked away, his limp more pronounced than Tanaka remembered. The guard came back. "Inside," he said not unkindly. "Now." Tanaka returned to his barracks and sat on his bed with the package in his hands. Around him, the other prisoners were getting ready for work detail, putting on their boots, talking quietly in Japanese about the events of 3 days ago. He unwrapped the package carefully. Inside were 5 tins of bacon, Hormel brand, premium quality, 10 bags of Maxwell House coffee, a set of civilian clothes, blue jeans, and a plaid shirt exactly his size. And at the bottom, wrapped in tissue paper, a small cowboy hat, brown leather, silver star on the band. A child's hat, but precious beyond measure. There was a letter, too, written in careful blocky handwriting. Dear Lieutenant Tanaka, I don't have fancy words. I'm just a sailor. But I know honor when I see it. You and your men showed more courage in 4 minutes than most men show in a lifetime. My son is 8 years old. His name is Tommy. When he grows up, I'm going to tell him about you. I'm going to tell him that the enemy isn't always who they say it is. That honor doesn't have a flag. Thank you for my life. I'm sorry I can't do more. With respect, Chief Samuel Morrison, United States Navy. Tanaka read the letter 3 times. Then he picked up the cowboy hat and turned it over in his hands. It was well made, real leather. The kind of thing a father would buy for his son and treasure. And Morrison had given it to him. To a Japanese prisoner. To the enemy. Sergeant Nakamura appeared at his shoulder. What is that, he asked. A gift, Tanaka said quietly. From the man I pulled from the water. He held up the hat. His son's hat. Nakamura stared at it, then at Tanaka, his face unreadable. They are not what we were told, he said finally. Are they? No, Tanaka said. They are not. He placed the hat carefully in his footlocker, along with the letter. The bacon and coffee he would share with the others. But the hat, the letter, these he would keep. These were proof. Evidence that the world was not what he had believed. Evidence that change was possible. Over the next 6 weeks, something extraordinary happened at Camp Number 5. At first, the changes were subtle. A few extra rations appearing in the mess hall, better quality meat, fresh fruit, real butter instead of margarine. The guards said nothing, but the prisoners noticed. Then came the books, a small library set up in one of the unused storage buildings, English novels, technical manuals, newspapers, all donated by the 87 survivors and their families. Then the medical supplies, new bandages, aspirin, vitamins, a Navy doctor who came twice a week to check on the prisoner's health. Then most remarkably, the letters. The International Red Cross had always allowed prisoners to write home, but now the letters were being processed faster, arriving more frequently. Some prisoners were receiving mail every week. Captain Fletcher said nothing about any of it, but everyone knew the truth. The 87 survivors were taking care of the men who had saved them, quietly, unofficially, creating what would later be called an underground railroad of kindness. And at the center of it all was Corporal O'Brien. Tanaka didn't know how it happened, didn't know when O'Brien made the decision to become more than a guard. But somewhere between June 8th and the end of summer, the young corporal with the red hair and the hard eyes transformed into something else. A friend. It began with small things. O'Brien making sure the work details got water breaks on hot days. O'Brien looking the other way when prisoners took a few extra minutes at lunch. O'Brien quietly distributing the packages that arrived from Morrison and the other survivors. Then it became bigger. O'Brien bringing in a radio so the prisoners could listen to music. O'Brien organizing a baseball game between prisoners and guards. O'Brien teaching English classes 3 evenings a week to anyone who wanted to learn. And through it all, O'Brien and Tanaka developed a bond that neither of them could quite explain. They were not friends exactly. The war stood between them. The uniforms. The reality of captor and captive. But they were something. Brothers perhaps in some way that transcended the normal definitions. On a warm evening in late July, O'Brien sat on the steps of the administration building while Tanaka swept the porch as part of his assigned duties. They had fallen into a habit of talking during these moments. About small things mostly. The weather, the news from the war fronts, nothing deep, nothing dangerous. But tonight, O'Brien seemed different. Troubled. My brother died at Pearl Harbor, he said suddenly. Patrick. He was 19, served on the Arizona. Tanaka stopped sweeping. I am sorry, he said. O'Brien nodded. I volunteered for this duty because I wanted to face the enemy, he said. I wanted to understand why Patrick had to die. I wanted to look Japanese soldiers in the eye and feel something. Hatred, maybe. Or closure. He paused. But you're not what I expected, he said. None of you are. You're just men. Sailors like Patrick was. Like I am. And I keep thinking if the situations were reversed, if Patrick had been captured, I'd want someone to treat him the way I'm treating you. He looked at Tanaka. Does that make sense? Yes, Tanaka said quietly. It makes sense. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Tanaka spoke. My father kill himself when he learn I surrender, he said. He think I bring shame. But I think now maybe shame is not in surrender. Maybe shame is in not seeing truth, in hating because we are told to hate, in killing because we are told to kill. He met O'Brien's eyes. Your brother died at Pearl Harbor. My father died from shame, both dead because of war. But you and me, we are alive. We can choose different. We can choose to see man, not enemy. O'Brien nodded slowly. Yeah, he said, yeah, we can. But choosing differently, it turned out, had consequences. On August 25th, 1943, Colonel Harrison returned to Camp Number 5. He arrived without warning, accompanied by 2 military police officers and a stenographer. Captain Fletcher was summoned to his office. The meeting lasted 20 minutes. When Fletcher emerged, his face was gray. That afternoon, Corporal O'Brien was placed under arrest. The charges were read in the camp yard while the prisoners watched from behind the wire. Unauthorized fraternization with enemy prisoners of war, smuggling contraband into a military detention facility, conduct unbecoming a United States soldier. The penalty if convicted would be reduction in rank 6 months in military prison and discharge with other than honorable status. Tanaka watched as O'Brien was led away in handcuffs, watched as the young corporal looked back, once his face a mixture of defiance and resignation. And Tanaka felt something he had not felt in months. Rage. Pure, clean, burning rage at the injustice of it. That night, he called a meeting in Barrack 7. All the prisoners from the rescue. 197 men crowded into the building, sitting on beds standing along the walls, all of them waiting to hear what Tanaka had to say. Brothers, Tanaka began in Japanese. Corporal O'Brien is being punished for showing us kindness, for treating us like human beings, for doing what we would want someone to do for us if our positions were reversed. He paused. We cannot let this stand, he said. We must act. But what can we do? Someone called out. We are prisoners. We have no power. Tanaka shook his head. We have one power, he said. We can tell the truth. He outlined his plan. A letter, written to the Navy Department, signed by all 197 men, defending O'Brien, explaining what he had done and why, asking for mercy. Some were skeptical. Why would the Americans listen to us? We are the enemy, but most agreed. And over the next 3 days, working in secret, they composed their letter. It was not eloquent. Tanaka's English was limited, and the help he received from other prisoners only slightly improved the grammar. But the message was clear. To the Honorable United States Navy Department, we the undersigned Japanese prisoners of war right to defend Corporal James O'Brien. Corporal O'Brien did not give us supplies out of weakness. He gave us supplies out of strength. The strength of American values. He showed us that even in war, humanity survives. Before June 8, 1943, we believed Americans were demons. We were taught to hate you. But when your ship exploded, we saw something different. We saw men dying, we saw sailors struggling, and we saw that beneath the uniform, beneath the flag, we are all the same. Corporal O'Brien's kindness did not make us weaker prisoners. It made us better men. Because of him, 197 Japanese soldiers now know that America fights for something greater than victory. It fights for dignity. If you punish him, you punish the very values you fight to defend. We ask, please show mercy to a man who showed mercy to us. With deepest respect, Lieutenant Hiroshi Tanaka and 196 others, Imperial Japanese Navy POWs. They signed it. Every man, their names written carefully in both English and Japanese. 197 signatures on 3 pages of precious paper that Captain Fletcher had quietly provided. On September 15th, the letter was mailed. On September 18th, Corporal O'Brien faced his court-martial. The proceeding was held in a military courtroom at the Presidio. 5 officers sat in judgment. The evidence was presented. 47 boxes of contraband. 200 photographs documenting O'Brien's activities. Testimony from guards who had witnessed his violations of protocol. The prosecutor was efficient and merciless. Corporal O'Brien violated 17 separate regulations. The evidence is clear. We recommend dishonorable discharge. O'Brien sat silent through most of it. When asked if he wished to speak in his own defense, he stood. Sirs, he said simply, I did what I did. I don't regret it. Those men saved my buddies. I couldn't just ignore that. He sat back down. The judges conferred quietly. The verdict was scheduled for September 20th, but on September 19th, something unexpected happened. The letter from the prisoners arrived at the Pentagon. It was routed through channels passed from desk to desk, moving up the chain of command with surprising speed. By mid-afternoon, it had reached the office of Admiral Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet. Nimitz read it twice. Then he picked up his phone. "Hold the verdict," he said. "I want to speak with these prisoners personally." On September 25th, a convoy of 3 vehicles arrived at POW Camp Number 5. From the lead car emerged Admiral Nimitz himself, flanked by 2 aides and a photographer. Captain Fletcher assembled the entire camp in the yard. The prisoners stood at attention, uncertain what was happening, knowing only that this was important. Nimitz walked slowly along the line of prisoners, his eyes taking in each face. He stopped in front of Tanaka. "Lieutenant Tanaka," he said, "I read your letter. All 197 signatures. I want to understand why you wrote it. You owe America nothing." Tanaka stepped forward, bowed deeply. "Admiral, sir," he said carefully, "I was taught America is evil. I was taught you are demons. But when I see your men jump in water to save us after Midway, when I see Corporal O'Brien give us food not as prisoners, but as men, when I see Chief Morrison's son give me cowboy hat, I understand something." He paused, searching for the right words. "America is not land." Tanaka's voice grew stronger. "America is idea. Idea that all men deserve dignity. Idea that enemy today can be friend tomorrow. Corporal O'Brien showed us this idea. If you punish him, you kill this idea. And if you kill this idea, then Japan wins. Because we go back to believing America is demon." His eyes met Nimitz's without wavering. "Please, sir, don't let us go back to darkness." The yard was absolutely silent. 200 prisoners, 50 guards, all waiting. Nimitz stood still for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Lieutenant," he said quietly, "you just taught me something about my own country that I'd forgotten. Thank you." He turned to Captain Fletcher. "Captain, effective immediately, all charges against Corporal O'Brien are dropped. Furthermore, I'm authorizing a new program. POW Rehabilitation Through Dignity. Camp Number 5 will be the pilot site. These men saved American lives. We will honor that not by locking them up tighter, but by showing them what America truly stands for." A collective exhalation went through the assembled prisoners. Relief, disbelief, hope. Nimitz looked back at Tanaka. "The war isn't over, Lieutenant," he said. "You're still prisoners. We're still enemies. But within these fences, we can be something else. We can be proof that humanity survives even in the darkest times." He saluted. Tanaka, without thinking, saluted back. And in that moment, something fundamental shifted. The war continued. The killing continued. But here in this small camp on the edge of San Francisco Bay, a different kind of battle was being won. The battle for the human soul. Over the next 21 months, from October 1943 to August 1945, Camp Number 5 became something unprecedented in the history of warfare. The prisoners were given better quarters, 4 men to a room instead of 20. The food improved dramatically. Fresh meat, vegetables, fruit, milk, the kind of diet that kept men healthy and strong. They were allowed to work for wages, 80 cents a day paid into accounts they could use to buy personal items. Some saved their money. Some spent it on cigarettes and candy. Some sent it home through the Red Cross to families in Japan who were starving. They were given access to education. English classes 3 times a week. Books from the San Francisco Public Library. Technical manuals for those who wanted to learn new skills. Even movies shown every Saturday evening on a screen set up in the mess hall. And most remarkably, they were given the chance to interact with Americans as equals. Baseball games, shared meals on holidays, conversations that went beyond the necessary minimum of guards and prisoners. Tanaka learned to ride a horse taught by a guard from Texas who had grown up on a ranch. He learned to play poker, taught by a sergeant from Louisiana who cheated outrageously but always with a smile. He learned about American history, American values, American dreams. And through it all, he kept the cowboy hat that Tommy Morrison had given him. Kept it in his footlocker, took it out sometimes when he was alone, turned it over in his hands, and remembered the moment when an 8-year-old American boy had looked at a Japanese prisoner and seen not an enemy, but the man who had saved his father. By the time Japan surrendered in August 1945, 97% of the prisoners at Camp Number 5 could speak conversational English. 78% reported positive feelings toward Americans. 89% said they would tell their families and friends in Japan that America was not the demon they had been taught to fear. And every single one of them signed a pledge. When we return home, we will tell the truth about America, not the propaganda, the truth. On August 19, 1945, the day before the farewell dinner, Morrison came to the camp one last time. This time he wasn't alone. A small boy walked beside him, clutching his father's good hand. Brown hair, freckles, the same gray eyes as his father. 8 years old. Tommy Morrison. The boy stared wide-eyed at the prisoners in the yard, then his gaze found Tanaka. His father must have pointed him out. Tommy walked forward, shy but determined. He stopped in front of the fence. "You saved my dad," he said, his voice small but clear. Tanaka knelt down to be at eye level with the boy. "Your father is brave man," Tanaka said. "You be proud." Tommy nodded. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out something. A small wooden carving of a ship, handmade, rough but earnest. "I made this for you," Tommy said. "So you remember us." He pushed it through the fence. Tanaka took it, his throat tight. "I never forget," Tanaka said. "Never." Morrison put his hand on his son's shoulder, his eyes wet. The next day, August 20th, 1945, 5 days after Emperor Hirohito's radio address announcing Japan's surrender, Captain Fletcher organized the farewell dinner. The mess hall was decorated with both American and Japanese flags. The tables were laden with food: roast beef, corn on the cob, apple pie, coffee, a feast worthy of celebration and sorrow both. Chief Morrison was there, his shoulder healed, but his limp permanent. Corporal O'Brien was there, promoted back to his original rank, his record cleared. 87 survivors from the USS Defiance were there, and 197 Japanese prisoners who were prisoners no longer. Morrison stood to speak. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying across the room, "2 years ago we were enemies. You wore one uniform, we wore another. But on June 8, 1943, something changed. When you dove into that water, you didn't see Americans or Japanese. You saw human beings. You taught us that honor isn't about flags, it's about choices. And you made the right choice. Tomorrow you go home. But you'll always be our brothers." The applause was long and heartfelt. Then Tanaka stood. His English was fluent now, polished by 2 years of practice. "Chief Morrison, Corporal O'Brien, Captain Fletcher, Admiral Nimitz," he said. "When I came to America, I had hate in my heart. I thought you were monsters, but you showed me something I never expected. You showed me that the strongest weapon is not the gun, not the bomb. The strongest weapon is kindness. In Japan, we have a saying, Teki wo awarimu, show mercy to your enemy. But you did more than mercy. You gave us dignity. You gave us hope. I will return to Japan. I will tell everyone America is not perfect, but America tries to be good. And that is why America will always be strong. Thank you for saving my life. Thank you for saving my soul." O'Brien stood up, walked across the room, embraced Tanaka. "Go home, Lieutenant," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Tell them the truth. Tell them we're not demons." "I will," Tanaka said. "I promise." Tanaka kept the small wooden ship in his pocket next to the letter Morrison had written. 2 gifts, one from a sailor, one from his son, both priceless beyond measure. On August 22, 1945, the prisoners boarded a transport ship bound for Japan. Tanaka stood at the rail as the ship pulled away from the dock, watching Camp Number 5 grow smaller in the distance. In his bag, carefully wrapped, he carried the cowboy hat, the tin of bacon empty now but preserved, the letter from Morrison, the wooden ship from Tommy, the photograph taken at the farewell dinner showing him standing between O'Brien and Morrison, all three smiling. Evidence, proof, ammunition in a war of truth against lies. He was going home to a Japan in ruins, to a nation defeated and occupied, to a people who would see him as a traitor for surrendering, for surviving, for not dying with honor. But he was also going home with a mission, a purpose, a truth that needed to be told. America was not the enemy. Hatred was the enemy. Ignorance was the enemy. And both could be defeated. One bacon strip, one cowboy hat, one act of mercy at a time. The ship steamed out of San Francisco Bay into the vast Pacific toward an uncertain future. But Tanaka was not afraid, because he had learned something in that American prison that was not a prison. He had learned that change was possible, that enemies could become brothers, that the walls we build in our minds are stronger than any wire fence. And he had learned that sometimes the greatest victories are not won on battlefields, but in moments of simple human kindness. The war was over. But the real work, the work of peace, was just beginning. And Hiroshi Tanaka, former lieutenant in the Imperial Japanese Navy, former prisoner of war, was ready. The bacon had been good. The cowboy hat was precious. The wooden ship was a child's treasure. But the lesson, the truth, the understanding that all men are brothers beneath the skin, that was the real gift. That was what he would carry home. That was what would change the world. The journey across the Pacific took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of watching the horizon. 3 weeks of preparing himself for what was to come. 3 weeks of rehearsing the words he would say to a nation that would call him traitor. But every time doubt crept in, Tanaka would take out the cowboy hat, run his fingers over the silver star, hold the wooden ship Tommy had carved, remember an 8-year-old boy's sacrifice. And he would know his path was right. September 1945. Yokohama Port, Japan. Tanaka stepped off the transport ship onto Japanese soil for the first time in 3 years. The dock was crowded with returning prisoners, American occupation forces, and Japanese civilians searching desperately for news of missing loved ones. Everything was ruins. The acrid smell of burned wood still hung in the air 3 weeks after the surrender. Silence where there should have been crowds. Emptiness where there should have been life. The city he remembered with its busy streets and proud buildings had been reduced to rubble and ash. Women in ragged clothes picked through debris. Children with hollow eyes begged for food. The smell of smoke and defeat hung heavy in the air. A young Japanese officer, barely 20, approached him. Name and rank, the officer said, his voice flat. Lieutenant Hiroshi Tanaka, Imperial Japanese Navy, captured at Midway, released from American POW camp. The officer's face hardened. Surrendered, he said, the word heavy with contempt. Report to the demobilization center. You will be processed and sent home. He turned away without saluting. Tanaka stood on the dock, the cowboy hat hidden in his bag, and felt the weight of what was to come. In this broken nation, being a survivor meant being a traitor. Being a prisoner meant being a coward. But he had made a promise. 3 weeks later, Tanaka stood in a borrowed schoolroom in what remained of Tokyo. 30 Japanese students, ages 12 to 17, sat before him. Their teacher, an elderly man named Watanabe, had been skeptical when Tanaka asked to speak to the class. "You want to tell them about America?" Watanabe had asked. "Why?" "So they can learn to love the nation that destroyed us," Tanaka had replied. "So they can learn that the nation that defeated us is not the demon they were taught to hate." Now, facing those young faces, Tanaka took the cowboy hat from his bag and placed it on the desk. Beside it, he set the small wooden ship. This hat, he began in Japanese, belonged to an 8-year-old American boy named Tommy Morrison. His father gave it to me, to a Japanese prisoner, to the enemy. And this ship, Tommy carved it himself, with his own hands, for me. He told them about the bacon, about Camp Number 5, about the USS Defiance and the 4 minutes that changed everything, about O'Brien and Fletcher and Nimitz, about how 197 Japanese prisoners chose to save 87 American lives. One student, a girl with fierce eyes, raised her hand. "Sensei," she said, "if what you say is true, then why did they drop atomic bombs on us? Why did they burn our cities?" Tanaka nodded. He had known this question would come. "Because war makes all men do terrible things," he said. "We massacred in Nanking. They firebombed Tokyo. We attacked Pearl Harbor. They destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. All of it was wrong. All of it was evil." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But after the war," he continued, "the Americans could have crushed us, could have starved us, could have taken revenge for every American life lost. Instead, they are sending food, medicine. They are helping us rebuild. That is the difference. That is why I speak." Another hand, a boy this time thin and pale. "Do you think we can forgive them, Sensei?" After everything, Tanaka picked up the cowboy hat, held the wooden ship. I think he said quietly that if an 8-year-old boy can give his most precious possession to a man his father called enemy, then carve a gift with his own hands, then yes, we can learn to forgive. We can learn to see the human beneath the uniform. He looked at each young face. The war of bullets is over, he said, but a new battle has just begun. You have been taught lies. I was taught lies. We were told Americans were demons without honor. We were wrong. They are not perfect. No nation is. But they believe in something we forgot during the war. They believe people can change, that enemies can become friends, that dignity matters more than victory. He placed the hat and the ship back in his bag. I will spend the rest of my life telling this truth, he said, to anyone who will listen, in schools, in villages, and cities. And one day, perhaps your children will grow up in a world where Japan and America are not enemies, but friends. Where this hat is not a curiosity, but a reminder of what is possible when we choose kindness over hatred. Watanabe stood slowly. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he walked to the front of the classroom and bowed deeply to Tanaka. Lieutenant, he said quietly, I was wrong to doubt you. This is the story our children need to hear. He straightened and Tanaka saw tears in the old man's eyes. Come back, Watanabe said. Come back and speak to them again, as many times as you can. Tanaka bowed in return. I will, Sensei. I promise. But as the students filed out, several stopped to bow deeply. The girl with fierce eyes approached. Sensei, she said quietly, my father died at Okinawa. I was taught to hate Americans. But your story, I will think about it. Thank you, she hurried away. Tanaka walked out of the school into the ruined streets of Tokyo. The work ahead was enormous. Decades of propaganda could not be undone with one speech. But he had made a start. Over the coming years, Tanaka would speak at 500 schools. He would write a book that the government would try to ban. He would face death threats from ultranationalists who called him a traitor. But he would not stop, because he had made a promise to O'Brien, to Morrison, to Tommy, who had carved a ship with his own small hands, to the 87 men who lived because 197 enemies chose mercy. The fighting was over. But his mission had just begun, and this time Hiroshi Tanaka knew which side would win.